All right, for this PowerPoint, we're going to go over revision, focusing on organization and content, specifically TEKS 9BI and 9BII. So just to recap on what revising and revision is, it's just improving the content and design of a document or your writing by making substantial changes to drafts. So things that you're going to consider when revising or during revision: style and word choice, clarity and concision, and organization and presentation of information. So just a rundown of that TEK. Students are developing drafts in a timed and open situation using an organizing structure appropriate to purpose, audience, topic, and context. And so these revising challenges are going to center around the flow of the passage, so the flow of your writing. Is the introduction clear? Is the thesis clear? Is there even a thesis? Does the conclusion wrap up the passage? Or are the transitions effective? And ultimately, all it's asking you to do is to make any changes to fix where organization is just not strong. 9BII, once again, is very similar to the last one, but you're developing an engaging idea reflecting depth of thought with specific details, examples, and commentary. So the questions that are under this standard are going to focus on details, examples, and commentary use in a particular text. And so all this is going to involve is changing content to make it stronger. And we're either going to be getting rid of repetitive or unnecessary sentences, or we're going to add sentences that are going to support certain ideas. And so think about adding or taking out specific details, examples, or commentary. Cohesion and clarity. We kind of talked about this in another PowerPoint, but if you haven't seen that, we're going to go over it here. Cohesion is the flow and connection between sentences, between paragraphs, or between ideas in writing. And this is what makes writing smooth and logical when read. Transition words and sentences are one way to help with cohesion. Same thing with having a consistent subject or focus. You don't want to go on a tangent or off topic. One example of cohesion with the quick little transition phrase is this here. Example: I studied 4 hours. As a result, I felt confident during the exam. And so as a result is a transition kind of phrase that's been included to connect these two thoughts, right? I studied for hours. I felt confident during the exam. Those would be fine. They'd stand alone without this phrase. It wouldn't be grammatically incorrect. However, you're going to have a better connection by including that as a result, because now we're saying, as a result of studying for hours, I felt confident during the exam. They're strongly or more strongly linked than they were before by explaining this causal relationship. Clarity is another way to help within revision. So when writing is clear, direct, and easy to follow. So you could have a grammatically correct passage or text, but if it's not clear, it's not going to be well written, and you're going to be asked to revise if you're writing your own work. So ways to keep things clear is avoiding confusion, so avoiding confusing language, vague wording, or overly complex sentence structure. You're going to use precise language, so no vague language. Avoid ambiguity or wordiness, so you're not going to use excessive wordiness. And logically structured sentences. You want to make sure that your sentences are in a logical order, so then that way you make sense. People can understand and follow your train of thought. And so one example of something that's unclear due to wordiness and then a complex sentence structure is this one here. So the project was done by them in a way that was effective. There's nothing grammatically wrong about this. However, there is room for revision and clarity issues. So to make it clear, you're going to make that subject right at the beginning. They completed the project effectively. So they, as opposed to the project was done by them. Why are we hiding that subject there? So we're going to put they front and center. They completed, straightforward, subject, verb. They completed. What did they complete? The project effectively. And so we're eliminating a lot of excess verbiage or words in this sentence below, and it's much more straightforward. I'm not having to search for the subject. I'm not having to search for what they've done and then even how they've done it. And so even though it's less words, it's more concise, it's clear, and it is a lot more effective than this unclear sentence up above. And that's just what we're going to be working on for the rest of this PowerPoint. So the bulk of these questions are going to revolve around excess or redundant information. And so what does that look like on the test? And you're just going to see some of these terms. You're going to see which sentence in the fourth paragraph is extraneous and should be deleted. So this question is just telling you that there's extra information and we need to take it out. The other way you're going to see it is redundant information. So she's concerned that she's included a redundant sentence and that needs to be deleted. And so remember, redundant is going to be something that is repeated, or it's information that has already been disclosed somewhere else in the paragraph, and this redundancy is not necessary. So when I talk about extraneous information, just remember it means that it's irrelevant or unrelated to the subject being dealt with. So it doesn't, match the topic, or like I said, it's just extra. It's not anything that's serving any sort of purpose. So you're going to ask yourself these questions when considering to delete a sentence when you see that word extraneous in your answer or in your question. So ask yourself, is this sentence needed for comprehension? So if it's asking you, hey, do you want to delete sentence 26? Ask yourself, is this needed for me to comprehend the entire text? Does the paragraph still make sense without this sentence? So if I were to take it out, does everything still make sense? Is it still logical? Or does the sentence connect to the previous sentence, thesis, or topic sentence? Now that kind of goes with that previous bullet point about it making sense. Like this is asking, does that extra or does that sentence connect to anything else that if I take it out, it would mess up my logical flow? And so we're going to look at some examples for this type of question. All right, first one is, which sentence in the fourth paragraph is extraneous and should be deleted? And so once again, we're seeing that word extraneous, which means that it's extra. There's going to be something extra that is not needed, and I'm going to take it out. And so I always look at, when I see where it says, okay, I'm looking at specific sentences, I highlight or I make sure that I note what those sentences are. So that way when I'm reading it or rereading it, I know what to focus on and what to think as I'm reading the entire paragraph in its entirety. Just a reminder of this quick tip. Take out the answer choice and reread to see if the paragraph still makes sense. This is one of the quickest ways to get this particular question answered. Take it out and then just see if it makes sense. And that kind of will help. A majority of the time you still need to double check and make sure all these other sentences need to be taken out. All right, so what we're going to do is I'm going to read this passage. I'm going to give you a minute to answer on your own, and then we're going to see how you did. So go ahead and follow along. I'm going to be on number 22. Okay, Myers thinks the changes in students' behavior are partly due to the improved lessons that she and other teachers are able to create. While some educators and parents may argue that teachers cannot prepare effective lessons in a shorter school week, many teachers offer an alternative scenario. Before they had to work on weekends to plan lessons. Now they're using Friday as their planning day. We're still in school mode on Fridays, and we found we're creating far superior lessons, Myers says. High school English teacher Candice Matzloss has found that longer days allow students to spend more time on activities. And as a teacher with over 20 years of experience, Matzloss knows a lot about teaching English. For example, science teachers have enough time to run labs, have the students write the lab reports, and clean up the labs in one class period, she says. In English class, students can write a rough draft, revise, and write a final draft of essays in 1 or 2 days instead of taking a week. All right, I'm going to give you a second. Take a look at your answer choices. Take a look at your passage. And I want you to make a decision whether it's on scratch paper or just indicated before we move on. Think of your answer. Hit pause on that video and then hit play and see if you're right. All right, the correct answer is B, sentence 28. We want to take out sentence 28, and I'm going to highlight that one just so we can see why. Hopefully you picked that too, but if not, don't worry. We're going to go over it just so that way you know why this is the correct answer. And so that highlighter is a little bit dark, but we can still see that sentence there. So that extraneous information, right, this extra information, and as a teacher with over 20 years of experience, Matzloss knows a lot about teaching English. And so we're going to look back. I'm going to go through these questions here. Is this sentence needed for comprehension? Do I need it to understand the rest of the text or the main point of view? And not really. It does give me some information about the previously mentioned Miss Matzloss. That she is an English teacher. She has over 20 years of experience, so she knows about English. But when we go on to the next sentence, we're doing for example. And so, for example, if I'm putting it right after sentence 28, then it should be an example of the preceding sentence. And that's not quite the case. However, it is providing an example for the activities that they're being able to spend more time on. So it's almost as if sentence 28 is getting in the way of sentence 29, because 29 is an example for the more time that they have on activities. And so that's why I want 28 to be taken out. As I read through or as I take it out, that was why I was able to see it. 27 is necessary only because she's offering some information. She is talking about the activities that they're able to spend more time on, and that's the main point of this entire article. This for example is needed because it's giving an example of those activities, so it's offering some clarity. If I take it out, it doesn't quite make sense because the rest of it just sounds like they're talking about an English class. And this beginning portion, this main claim at the beginning of this paragraph is not specifically just talking about English, right? It's talking about lessons in all their classes. And then let's see, in this final one, in English class, students can write a rough draft, revise, and write a final draft of the essays. That one's needed only because it's offering another example of the activities that they have more time to do. 28 is the one that stands out. It's the one that I can take out and nothing else is negatively affected. And it's just extra information that's not needed to make the main point, which is they have more time to do certain activities. All right, let's talk about redundant information. And so redundant is right up there above. You're going to see it phrased very similarly. Nancy is concerned that she has included redundant sentence in the fifth paragraph. That just means that that piece of text or that sentence is not needed or no longer needed or useful. It's able to be omitted without loss of meaning or function. So I can take that sentence out, and it's not going to necessarily affect the entire piece because it was already, or at least that information was disclosed somewhere else in the text. So it's okay to take it out. It's not extra in that, and the reason it's different than extra means that it just didn't connect. Redundant means that it's already been talked about in the passage and I don't need to say it again. You're going to ask yourself these questions when considering to delete a sentence, and it's very similar to when we're looking at extraneous. So is this sentence needed for comprehension? Do I need it to understand the overall text? Does the paragraph still make sense without that particular sentence? Does the sentence connect to anything previously? So is it connecting? Because if it's not, then I want to take that out. And then the last one, and this is the one that really helps out the most, and it does make it a lot easier to spot redundancy. Can I point to another sentence or concept that it repeats? So we're going to look at an example. Nancy is concerned that she's included a redundant sentence in the fifth paragraph. Which sentence should be deleted? So we're going to look at those particular sentences. Like I said, I like to highlight the different sentences that I want to pay attention to, and I see that here. So I'm going to read this aloud. I want you to listen for any of the redundant information. Take note of it on a piece of paper or scratch paper. I want you to write down your answer, and I'll kind of give you a cue on when to do that. All right, follow along. School budgets may benefit from a shortened week as well. Introducing the 4-day school week may provide a way for school districts to save money in areas where budgets are strained. School budgets are stretched. Districts reduce spending on fuel, bus drivers' salaries, and maintenance when they decrease the number of days students are transported to and from school. Expenses to keep facilities open and clean are also lowered, as are food costs. All right, ask yourselves those questions. Is this particular sentence needed for comprehension? Does it make sense without this sentence? Does it connect to anything else? And then can I find where that particular sentence is repeated? So do I see sentence 32 somewhere, 33 somewhere? So go ahead and hit pause on the video, and I want you to go through and choose your answer and then come back and see if you're right. All right, we're going to see if you are correct. Hopefully you hit pause and we're looking for your answer. The correct answer is sentence 33B. So this is the one I want to take out. So I'm going to underline it here. So 33. I'm going to take it out. And so I want to know, or I'm going to see if you knew where this was repeated. So school budgets are stretched. Now, this technically, we could use it. It's going to help with comprehension. The sentence does make sense, or the paragraph does make sense if I take it out. It does connect in a way because we're talking about ways the budgets may benefit and why we need it. But I want to see where it's at, and it's right here, or where the redundancy is. We've already said that budgets are stretched, budgets are strained. So I'm not going to waste good, wonderful writing space for repeating it again. So I don't need this here. There is a little bit of a distractor in here where you see, I want to see when it talks about expenses. So districts reduce spending on fuel. Let me write a little bullet point here. Districts reduce spending on fuel when they decrease number of the days. Here, expenses to keep facilities open are lowered. that can be a little deceiving because it sounds similar, right? Districts reduce spending, expenses are also lowered, but because they're including it with the different types of examples, it's tied to that. I'm not going to take it out. These are still two different concepts. But here it's very straightforward. Budgets are strained, school budgets are stretched. I'm going to take out that sentence 33. Questions about redundancy can be asked in two different ways, so not just the one we saw previously. One is focused on organization, and the other is focused on rewriting the sentence to fix the redundancy. And so that first one, you'll see where it's just an extra sentence, right? I'm going to take out the sentence. For this one, we're looking at the most effective way to revise the sentence, and you see different sentence examples. A lot of the time, you're going to be looking for redundant words, so words that are going to show up multiple times, or like multiple verbs when you don't need them. And so we're going to see an example of that. But here you're going to take out a full sentence. On these types, you're going to really look at your word usage and where certain things are going to be repetitive. And this is an example for this particular question. So Layla has included redundant information in sentence 37. What is the most effective way to revise this sentence? So I want you to go ahead, read. I'm going to read up at the top just so you can hear it out loud. And then I want you to take a moment. So hit pause, and then you're going to answer the question. So 37, an hour later, when his mother called, Julian was wiping noodles and wiping cheese sauce off of Pedro, off himself, off the wall, and off the floor. Julian, how's it going with Pedro? His mother asked. And so you need to consider what is the most effective way to revise this sentence. And so most effective means, is it clear? Is it concise? Am I using the appropriate amount of words? Is it clear? Do I understand exactly what's going on? So one way to do this, before you hit pause, I want you to go through in sentence 37 and 38, and I want you just to try and notice things that are repeating, even if it's individual words, things that sound like they're being repeated. Just kind of give it a highlight and see if that helps you answer the question. So go ahead, hit pause, do that little tip, and then come back and see if you're correct. All right, let's take a look. The answer is D, and I want to see if you caught on with some of those repetitive terms. And so what I noticed when I was reading here, wiping and wiping, so these two verbs were repeating, right? So I was like, okay, I see that. That's a possible redundancy. So going off a little bit more, so wiping and wiping, the sauce off of Pedro, off himself, off the wall, so off, and off was also repetitive, multiple times. And so I'm like, okay, so these terms, it's very likely that I'm going to have to consolidate them or put them together. So Julian was wiping noodles and cheese. So why would I put that verb multiple times when I can just say it like that, right? Or he was wiping noodles and cheese off of Pedro, himself, and the floor. There's certain things that don't necessarily or aren't necessarily needed. And I bet you that's what our answer looks like. And it is. We're only stuck with one wiping, and then the sauce off Pedro, that in the wall. We left off for just one time, and then this verb just once. So if we take a look at these, we're going to notice that it's not fixing any of that, or it makes things unclear. If we look at A, an hour later, Julian was wiping off of Pedro himself, the wall and the floor, the noodles and cheese sauce when his mother called. They have a complex sentence structure, and then also it makes it sound like he's also wiping the noodles and cheese just with the way they've organized this information. So now it's unclear in a really silly way, if I'm being honest. So that's not going to be my answer. B, an hour later, Julian was wiping noodles and cheese off of Pedro and himself and the wall and also the floor. And so we've eliminated one redundancy and added others, right? We have a polysyndeton here with all these ands going on. And like I said, creatively or informally, you can get away with multiple ands with polysyndeton, but we're looking for formal writing here. And so this is not going to be my right answer, especially because it just makes it a little bit more confusing. And then C, an hour later when his mother called, noodles and cheese sauce were being wiped off of Julian, himself, the wall, and the floor. This is also a sentence organization that makes things unclear. So when you have a phrase like this, an hour later when his mother called, right after this comma, I need my subject. So his mother, but it makes it sound like noodles and cheese is him, right? Instead of Julian. I would want to have an hour later when his mother called. Julian was wiping off those. And also, if you've gone through our passive and active voice lesson, you notice that this is passive voice, and I don't want passive voice in my answer choice. So that is another one that is wrong. So D is what you're left with. Hopefully you got that right. Let's go on to the next one. So revising for clarity, organizing sentences. So the same as when writing an essay, the passages you'll read must also have effective sentences. Thesis statements, position statements provide an overview of the paragraph that will be discussed, and sometimes you're going to be asked to add or choose an effective position or thesis statement. All sentences in that paragraph must connect back to that particular statement. Concluding statements are something else that you'll have to look at, and those offer finality to the paragraph and can also provide a summation or overview of what has been said. So anytime that you're including a concluding sentence, it needs to serve that purpose. And then transitions offer a connection between sentences and paragraphs. And so you'll also have to really consider the transition use in the passage. Does it actually connect, or you're going to have to actually include a transitional phrase or a word on your own. These are just what those types of questions look like. You're going to see adding sentences. What is the most effective position statement? April would like to add a detail, and it's going to give you an example of that detail, and you're going to have to figure out where in the passage it needs to go. Raul needs to include a stronger thesis statement. So you're happy to replace the sentence with a thesis statement that's going to serve the purpose of giving an overview of what's going to be discussed. And then Sophia would like to add a quotation and bring her paper to an effective conclusion. We're going to talk about what a concluding sentence would help and entail for that. All right, this is our first question. I'm going to read through that top passage. You're going to write on a scratch paper when I give you the cue, your answer, and then we're going to go over it. So Raul needs to include a stronger thesis statement in his essay. So I'm focusing on a thesis statement. Where do we find thesis statements? At the end of the introduction. And so we're going to look at sentence 5. Which sentence should replace sentence 5 to accomplish that goal? And so sentence 5 is right here. Just take note of that as you're reading along, because you want to have something that's better than this, right? You're making an improvement on it. All right, let's go ahead and look at these tips. You want to read the entire paragraph. So we have the paragraph here. Sometimes it's going to be, sometimes, most of the time, it's going to be helpful to read the entire passage. So you should have read the entire passage by now just to know what's going on. But I gave you just this little excerpt because we didn't have enough space on this PowerPoint. You're going to discern the main idea of the paragraph. You're going to try out each answer choice, and then remember a thesis statement is meant to clearly express the main idea or argument of a text. I want you to keep that in mind before you make your final answer. So let's go ahead and read this excerpt. There's an expression that everything's bigger in Texas, and visitors to Big Bend National Park will agree. This great park is located around the Big Bend of the Rio Grande River, running along more than 100 miles of the U.S.-Mexico border. At 1,252 square miles, it's bigger than the state of Rhode Island. It's not just the size of Big Bend that attracts tourists. There are many choices of activities for visitors at Big Bend. So I'm going to give you a second. Go ahead, hit pause on this video. I want you to make your choice for your answer and then come back and see if you're right. And then A is the correct answer. With miles of hiking trails, rafting, wildlife, and incredible scenery, Big Bend has something extraordinary to offer everyone. And so we're taking a look at all these examples. So once again, there are many choices. And so we see those many choices reflected in this particular thesis statement. Miles of hiking trails, rafting, wildlife, and incredible scenery. Big Bend has something for everyone. And so it's talking about all those visitors that are going along. And it says it's not just the size of Big Bend that attracts the tourists, but the activities. So the overall thesis statement that's going to be discussed is what's going to be taking place, or at least the options activities that people have. If you look at the other ones, like I said, it does get a little bit difficult because these are all grammatically correct if I take a look. So you're happy to just see which one's better, right? This is better. A is the best one only because it's concise, it gets to the point, and it offers clarity that was not available in sentence 5, right? There are many choices is vague. It's not really giving you a specificity of the activities. And answer choice A does. B kind of does the same thing as what sentence 5 is already doing. It's a wide variety of activities, but it's not giving me any type of specificity here. C, it kind of gives you, there's hiking and rafting for adventurous tourists, but there's also wildlife and scenery for those who might prefer a quieter visit to Big Bend. This is a little too detailed at this point. That would probably work better in a paragraph, but it's not this big, broad statement that I need for a thesis statement. And then finally, D, depending on what your interests are, all visitors to Big Bend should be able to find activity from hiking and rafting to observing wildlife or different landscapes. Once again, that wordiness is not necessarily what I'm looking for, nor this specificity where it's talking about like your interest. We want to make it appropriate for everyone because it's all tourists, not necessarily a single individual. And even then, all visitors should be able to find an activity. It's still kind of putting focused on the interest of others as opposed to a focus on the actual activities itself. Answer choice A highlights and puts kind of in the spotlight the activities that are offered. That's needed for this particular answer choice for 5. All right. And that's what makes these types of questions a little difficult. You can see why all of them could possibly be a good answer, but we want to do concise, straightforward, and broad for a thesis statement. All right, let's look at the next one. Which of these sentences should Nancy add at the beginning of the second paragraph to serve as the most effective position statement? So a position statement is going to make a position, make a claim about something, and we need to make sure that it matches the rest of the paragraph. So go ahead, I'm going to read through. I want you to think about, as you're listening, what is the position or claim being made, or what is the author's position? As you read through, you should be able to discern that through the details in this passage. So let's go ahead and start at 7 here. In this program, students spend a little more time in school 4 days a week. Then they have Friday off to catch up on their sleep, enjoy time with family and friends, and complete their many responsibilities. Although some experts fear that reducing the length of the school week will worsen student learning, recent studies contradict this. In 2015, Dr. Mark Anderson of Montana State University and Dr. Mary Beth Walker of Georgia State University reviewed scores for Colorado elementary school students who were placed in a 4-day system. They found that math scores improved about 7% and reading scores also improved. We thought that especially for the younger elementary school kids, longer days on a shorter school week would hurt their academic performance because their attention spans are shorter, Dr. Walker said. Research also thought a longer weekend would give students more of an opportunity to forget what they had learned. Clearly, this was not the case. The study cited shows this hypothesis is incorrect. All right, I want you to take a minute, look at your answer choices, make a decision, and then come back, or hit pause and then come back, and let's see if you got it right. All right, the correct answer is D. The 4-day school week provides benefits that would help the students, teachers, and schools in our district. And so what you're going to do is when you look at that, you're just going to go back and see, is that the claim being made? Is that the position that this author is taking? And yes, it does talk about the 4-day school week and that it's offering benefits. And most of the examples, or all the examples here, are benefits to that 4-day school week. And not only that, it shows how it's positively affecting students. So we have students... where's that? They have more time to catch up on sleep, spend time with family, complete their many responsibilities. For teachers, we see improved scores for like 7%, reading scores improved, that their academic performance is gaining. Let's see. So all of that's for teachers and schools in our district. Let's see. I want to make sure we hit all of those. Yeah. So all of them are benefiting. So this is true. We do see those examples in the overall text. Let's take a look at these other answer choices though, just to make sure that I am not mistaken. So, A, I think I would like the 4-day school week because I would enjoy the extra time to rest on the weekend. If you're in my class, I would already tell you right off the bat, I don't want you to use first person. You should not put that as your position statement saying, I think. It's not very strong. You want something really solid. Instead of, I think I would like a 4-day school week, a 4-day school week should be implemented for a position statement. And that's my take on that. Do not use first person like that when you are making a position claim. B, the 4-day school week is a great idea for all students and parents, and even the school district would likely benefit. And so this one, it is making some sort of claim here, like the 4-day school week is a great idea. But we have just this very like informal language, right? I'm not quite liking that. It likely would benefit them. I don't like the term likely just because it sounds like you're unsure. You want a strong claim. The 4-day school week would benefit students, parents, and even the district. And even then, this is some odd phrasing. Why am I going to have, is a great idea as opposed to it's going to benefit? I can move this all the way over here. The 4-day school week would benefit all students and parents. And answer choice D does that, and that's why answer D is correct. Looking at C, we spend way too much time during the week in school, and it would be nice to have a 3-day weekend for a job or to just relax. That is not a position. It's just giving me a reason why, hey, the position itself here is saying we spend too much time during the week at school, as opposed to focusing on the 4-day school week. Even then, it's focusing on a 3-day weekend, and that's not necessarily what this entire paragraph is about. It's focusing on the 4-day school week. So C is almost being it's almost changing the focus of the entire passage altogether. So we're left with D. All right, we got another one. Sophia would like to add a quotation to the end of her paper to bring it to an effective conclusion. Which of the following would be the most effective for her to add? Just remember, similar to a thesis or a position statement, an effective conclusion, you need to read the entire passage, get a sense for the main idea, try out each answer choice, and remember a conclusion is meant to wrap up the writing by reinforcing some sort of main idea or giving a sense of closure. So I'm not looking for very specific details or something that was meant for a piece of the story early on. I'm looking for something that's much broader that gives insight into the overall story. I do have a small little excerpt here. For anything that's concluding or a conclusion, you do need to read the entire passage. You need to know what's going on in the entire thing, because you're summarizing the whole thing essentially, or you're coming to a conclusion based off of the entire passage. Because of space, I didn't include the whole thing, but I still wanted you to see an example of this type of question. So go ahead and follow along. We're going to make do with what we got. And then I'm going to give you a moment to make your answer choice. So 28. Of course, the media hounded. They spent hours being interviewed over the phone and even appeared together on national television to tell their story. People were eager to read and hear about Vogel's selfless act of kindness. Although she was a little embarrassed at first, McMath was happy to be part of such an inspiring story. And while Vogel was initially surprised by all the attention the race was receiving, she soon realized that people just enjoy hearing a story that makes them smile. Megan Vogel was honored at the National Sportsmanship Awards as an outstanding role model for youth. All right, take a moment, look through your answer choices. Give yourself some time on this because these can be tricky with how much is included in each answer choice. Hit pause and then come back and see if you're correct. All right, welcome back. Let's take a look. Your answer is B. So looking back at the day that she both won a gold medal and came in last place, Vogel said, I got more attention from helping Arden than for winning at state, but I don't mind. Sportsmanship is a much bigger deal than winning a race. And that last portion, that last sentence right there really did it for me and what made me think, yes, this is my answer, because we're almost getting like this lesson that was found from this entire text. Everything else is just, or every other answer choice that's here, is really just an added detail to the story or something that just isn't concluding my overall paragraph. So A, for instance, interesting, Vogel has been reported to have once said to the reporter, I was just worried about getting Arden across the finish line and not hurting her. There's nothing extra added here. I'm not getting a sense of closure. It just sounds like information that took place during this event, right? A detail that's not a summation of everything. Next, it definitely caught me off guard. Vogel said of the attention after the race, I was expecting the first week of summer to be pretty relaxed. I was looking forward to getting away. All I could think was, you've got to be kidding me. I'm definitely not going to end my sentence with this kind of phrase here. And even then, it's still her at the beginning of her journey, right? The beginning of her becoming this recognized person by the media. She hasn't learned anything else yet. Unlike B, where she realized even with all that attention and what she's learned from all that attention is sportsmanship is a much bigger deal than winning a race. And then finally, D, one day Vogel was heard to have said to a group of people who were listening, when I hear words like that, I think of Harriet Tubman and saving people's lives. I don't consider myself a hero. And so once again, it's a little bit of a detail. Maybe that could kind of work there just because we see an outstanding role model for youth. But it gives such a specific example. It almost sounds like it needs to be a quote earlier on in the text. And I think if you had the entire passage, you would see it probably belongs somewhere else. And even then, we're not getting some large overarching lesson that was learned. It's just giving us something that happened or that she realized for herself personally, and not kind of this broader thematic lesson that we get with sportsmanship is a much bigger deal than winning a race. So B is the most effective sentence to add. It is the best out of these answer choices. Okay, we have one more question. April would like to add the following detail to the 6th paragraph, and it provides us that detail here. It provided skateboarding with unprecedented coverage and led to the general public's viewing of skateboarders as professional athletes. And so here you're going to just see, where should we put this sentence? And so I always like to make note of where these sentences are. I need it either before or after sentence 30, after sentence 31, or after sentence 32. Please consider these tips on the right-hand side. Once again, read the entire paragraph. You can try inserting the answer choice to see which one fits best. And I'm going to say that's the way to go for these questions. You're going to answer them a lot more quickly when you do this particular strategy. Consider if it connects to the sentence before and after. That's going to help you see if it actually fits. And then ensure it does not change the original intent of the paragraph. If it's changing what this paragraph is intending to disclose, then you need to take it out or not use it. So let's go ahead. I'm going to read this, and then I want you to think about where you would place that particular detail. So starting at sentence 30, the X Games placed the subculture of skateboarding on the main stage. Utilizing the formula that made ESPN connect with a younger audience, the Olympics governing body decided to include skateboarding in the 2020 Games. They are hoping that skateboarding will rejuvenate the Olympics while at the same time showcasing the Olympic spirit of sportsmanship. Skateboarders have always embodied the Olympic values. Skateboarding has always been more about appreciation of others' abilities and talents than strictly about the competition. So I'm going to give you a second, hit pause, read through, use that strategy of inserting each answer choice, and then make your decision, and then come back and see if you're right. All right, and our answer is B, after sentence 30. So if I put it after sentence 30, so the X Games placed the subculture of skateboarding on the main stage. It provided skateboarding with unprecedented coverage and led to the general public viewing of skateboarders as professional athletes. I said yes because if we look at this pronoun, something, it provided skateboarding with unprecedented coverage. So what I'm thinking is I need to make sure that my pronoun antecedent agreement is correct. So something provided skateboarding with unprecedented coverage. Here, if I put it after 30, it would be the X Games. That makes sense. The X Games provided skateboarding with unprecedented coverage. That's my connection. And then another hint for that is that it put it on the main stage. So by saying it's on the main stage, it's alluding to this fact, or it's kind of saying because it's on the main stage, it now has this coverage. There's just so much connection between these two sentences in that regard. After sentence, I wouldn't put it before sentence 30 only because I'm not getting any clarity on this pronoun. If I put it at the beginning of this paragraph, there's nothing that's preceding it that's going to tell me what that is. And then now I have an unclear sentence. So it's not going to go before sentence 30. After sentence 31, it takes me away from what it is or something that's providing unprecedented coverage. 31 is the distractor, though, because it has utilizing the formula that made ESPN connect with a younger audience. The Olympics governing body decided to include skateboarding in the 2020 Games. You could probably make a claim that the 2020 Games are what provided skateboarding with unprecedented coverage, but that's not logically sound, only because it is because of the coverage from the X Games that the Olympics included it in there. And so if I changed it, if I put it after 31, I'm now changing the intent of the paragraph, or now I'm kind of making something up because it wasn't the Olympics that provided that type of coverage. And then finally, after sentence 32, it's just too far removed at this point, where it's saying it led to the general public's viewing of skateboarders. Then even in 32, they're hoping that skateboarding will rejuvenate the Olympics while at the same time showcasing the Olympic spirit of sportsmanship. And then it provided skateboarding unprecedented coverage. It's not necessarily working there only because the viewing, there's no reference to that, and it's still not as strong a connection as it was with sentence 30. All right, we got one more. April wants to add a supporting sentence to the third paragraph. Which sentence should be added after sentence 13? I'm going to read through that paragraph as we go. Follow along, and I want you to think about what needs to be added. We have these different answer choices. We want to read the sentence and really consider what information is necessary. All right. Let me go ahead and read through, follow along. While the sport failed to grab the general public's attention, there were still those who continued skateboarding despite the safety concerns. They saw opportunities to improve the original design and create safer and more maneuverable boards. One of those people was inventor Richard Stevenson. He also replaced the common steel wheels with clay ones. Stevenson, however, did not stop there. He also transformed skateboarding with his addition of the kicktail. A kicktail is the curved section of the back of the board, which allows skateboards to fly. With these improvements, they now had more control and could perform aerial stunts. Okay, let's take a look. I want you to hit pause, answer the question, and then come back and see if you're correct. All right, let's see what the answer is. It is C. Stevenson used his knowledge of shaping surfboards and applied it to shaping skateboards. If we look at sentence 13, it just has him. Here we go. One of those people was inventor Richard Stevenson. Stevenson used his knowledge of shaping surfboards and applied it to shaping skateboards. He also replaced. See, it fits. It logically fits because it's giving you an example of how he made or how he created, adapted the skateboard, and then it continues on with other ways that he's adapted of it. A, we don't want to include because we have, let me mark this up here. Stevenson saw a way to improve skateboards, and here it's repetitive. They saw opportunities to improve the original design up here. Oops. But that's repetitive, and I don't want repetitive information on here, because we've spent so much time revising and editing to take out repetitive. So saw ways to improve, and then I have ways to improve. I don't want a redundant information issue. B, Stevenson, however, was not the only inventor who significantly improved. This makes it sound like that we're going to suddenly talk about another inventor. So that would not be the case, because we go on in sentence 14 to talk about how Stevenson was still modifying and changing the skateboard. And then finally, Stevenson witnessed surfers riding skateboards. This is extraneous information. There's no point for us knowing that he witnessed surfers riding skateboards. That's not helpful information. And we see it used appropriately in C a little bit better because it's more focused on him changing the design. So extraneous information for D. We have redundant information in A. And then here, B, it's changing the intent of the overall passage. So we're left with C.